Welcome to the German Climate Pavilion at COP28 in Dubai. Ambitious, just together.
Hello everybody, and welcome to the first Science for Action evening here in the German Pavilion, here at COP28. Tonight it will be all about science, and I'm so glad that so many people are here. Science is maybe not so boring at all, is it? My name is Friedemann Kahl. I'm from the DLR Project Management Agency, and I will guide you through the night. I would like to start with a thank you for the Federal Ministry of Education and Research, the BMBF, for hosting us here tonight and for bringing science on stage here at COP28. We have Carola. She is actually already more than 20 years in the business of IPCC, and she will welcome you on behalf of the BMBF. Carola, you have the floor.
Thank you, Friedemann. Now you took away right the first sentence of my speech. My name is Carola Best, and I speak on behalf of the German Ministry of Education and Research, the host of this event. Tonight, as Friedemann said, it's all about science. It's a pleasure to bring the best available science to the stage at the heart of international climate policy here at COP28. Science is the basis for the Convention and the Paris Agreement. At this COP, the importance of science-based climate policy is underlined in particular by the debate on the global stocktake. BMBF's strategy for climate research is clear. We need to broaden knowledge and deliver options for implementing climate action. We have to reinvent our way of life, which is very challenging, but it also presents opportunities to shape the future the way we want it to be. We will build prosperity on renewable energies and on sustainable and safe technologies. In this way, we will also enjoy numerous co-benefits, for example, for health. However, this transformation must be implemented at all levels and very quickly. Difficult choices have to be made, and optimal solutions are not yet known everywhere. That is why we need to further increase the ambitions in research. Two examples of what BMBF is doing. First, the ministry funds research on hydrogen supply chains and a green hydrogen economy, with partners in particular in the global south. Second, to end global warming, we need to achieve net zero greenhouse gas emissions. This means that we need to compensate for hard-to-abate residual emissions. Hence, we have to remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. If ambitious mitigation action is further delayed, we might exceed the carbon budget consistent with the Paris Agreement goals, which would entail enormous risks. In this case, we would need to remove even more carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. However, for now, it is not at all clear how this could be done, in particular without negative consequences on sustainable development. Therefore, our research ministry initiated 2 research programs on terrestrial and marine carbon dioxide removal. We want our funding activities to be really policy relevant. This is why our research ministry engages in an active and open dialogue between society, politics and science in order to shape our research agenda. And this is precisely what we're doing here at COP28. Our Science for Action evening here at the German Pavilion provides an opportunity for such an exchange. Now that a new IPCC cycle has just begun and the first global stocktake is almost complete, we hope that this exchange tonight can help in shaping a research agenda that will move us towards achieving the Paris goals. I'm very grateful to welcome so many renowned IPCC experts. Look forward to fruitful discussions. I'm particularly pleased to inform you that the German Ministry of Education and Research invites you to stay after the official end of the event, as food and drinks will be served. I'm now pleased to hand over to Friedemann again and wish us all a fruitful exchange afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you, Carola. Like Carola said, research helps to implement the Paris Agreement. And the good thing of research is it is always on the shoulder of giants. And when it comes to climate change, these shoulders are quite big. And one of these big shoulders belonged to Hans Otto Pörntner. He is the head of the Department of Integrative Ecophysiology at the Alfred Wegener Institute, and he is also appointed member of the German Advisory Council on Global Change, the WBGU. Sorry. In the last cycle, he was the co-chair of Working Group 2 of Impacts, Adaptation, Vulnerability, and he was in the front line of all 3 special reports, and of course the contribution to the assessment report of the IPCC, the 6th assessment report. So I'm really pleased to give Hans the floor here on our science stage.
Yeah, thanks a lot. When I was asked to give an overview of the AR6, I thought this is impossible in 7 minutes. 8,000 pages, how can we actually do, and it's probably more than 8,000 pages if we take the special reports and add them on top. And so I'm a bit selective, and apologies to my Working Group 1 and former Working Group 1 and Working Group 3 colleagues if I mess up with the Working Group 1 and Working Group 3 aspects a bit or do not value them enough. And there's one key issue that is being discussed here at this COP, especially how to bring biodiversity and climate together, how to address the 2 crises together, where actually one of our findings in the Working Group 2 report, building on a workshop report, was that we have to deal with them together. There's no way to just solve one and not the other. And this is something I would like to emphasize, if I can get the next slide. Okay. So some of this insight is in the reports that we have produced in the AR6, which was the busiest IPCC cycle ever, with 3 special reports, and then the working group main reports, and then we had a synthesis, and you see some additional products that were generated during the AR6 or just after the AR6 in the bottom line. And an emphasis to be made here is that certainly both climate change and the biodiversity crisis represent an existential loss to our foundation, to our livelihoods and to our existence on this planet. So both of them need to be solved. And we developed a holistic view of this in the Working Group 2 report by looking at the interactions between 3 large systems where, based on more recent discussions and insights, you could place human society on par with the climate system and biodiversity, because all 3 of them and their interactions shape the fate of the planet. And currently we have imbalances between these, and which probably is some of the reason why people call this the Anthropocene. And you see these thick red arrows indicating how human society is negatively affecting climate and is negatively affecting ecosystems, causing climate change, biodiversity loss, land degradation, pollution, and so forth. So all of these crises need to be solved. And just flagging one of the projections of impacts, where actually you could make very harsh statements in terms of that the climate future is not beneficial for life as it currently exists on this planet. And the perspective is that due to surpassing of evolutionary adaptation limits, there will be loss of species habitat, and including loss of human habitat, especially at low latitudes for mammals. Certainly it's a combination of high temperature and high humidity conditions. And you see, according to the projections and the future degrees of warming, how the area of where living conditions become life-threatening for species and humans is expanding depending on the degree of warming. And this concerns especially animal life, and we are part of the animal kingdom, and it includes animal life in the ocean and on land. So the conclusion will be, if we don't get it under control, animal life and humans will have to retreat from the tropics, and animals have already started doing so. And these imbalances are destroying, in that respect, the ecosystems and the natural life support systems. To be very clear of this, the continuing production and use of fossil fuels is a key aspect in this, as documented in the UNEP production gap report. And you see the difference here between what is actually going on in terms of production rates and where they should be going, depending on emissions reduction. And cities certainly play a big role in this, being responsible for more than 70% of global emissions. So the vision really is that we need to strengthen these positive interactions between the three major systems that are dominating the planet. There needs to be mitigation, there needs to be conservation action, actually restoration action, and there needs to be allowance for adaptation efforts, both for human societies and for human systems. And there's one key finding, that actually for that there needs to be a mitigation effort in terms of cutting emissions, where there is no apology on any side for not doing so. So you cannot blame it on nature to do the emissions, to deal with the emissions, and keep going and doing business as usual. And all systems on the planet are affected by this transformation, human systems, ecosystems, and only then we will be heading into a future where we see climate stabilization, where ecosystems actually can play out and bring us into a more sustainable future. There need to be governance action, including finance, knowledge and capacity, and catalyzing conditions and the respective technologies in place. And I think that is one of the focuses of Working Group 3, to talk about the technologies that are actually should be taking us into a successful mitigation future. Just to emphasize the point that natural systems are not able to do this for us, we are already seeing under current conditions during the hot summer months, all ecosystems on the planet experiencing reductions in their productivity, meaning reductions in the capacity to actually absorb the CO2. And this, in future climates, will be becoming worse. And if you take a productivity curve across latitudes, as indicated here, the blue line characterizes the previous conditions, and the orange line characterizes how the productivity has already been declining. And what this means essentially is, in the future, if we do not take care of fossil fuel emissions, ecosystems will suffer to an extent that they will not be able to provide their services anymore. And the biodiversity behind is needed to actually maintain ecosystem functioning. We have been compiling lots of adaptation and mitigation options in our reports, and the important finding here is clearly that actually in many cases there are synergies between the two. In some, there are trade-offs where you need to be aware and where you need to control them, or you need to avoid those activities. We have been analyzing feasibility, we have been analyzing effectiveness, and then identifying where the synergies actually play out. And for mitigation options, there has also been an analysis of the financial background in terms of how these issues can be funded and where actually there are cost benefits when they are implemented. The future picture and how it looks like, how a sustainable world might look like, actually has to do a lot with spatial planning. And the spatial planning that actually does and implement effective ecosystem and biodiversity conservation on 30 to 50% of the surface areas of land, freshwater, and ocean systems, where we have a mosaic structure, where species can migrate, where we have healthy populations that are providing the ecosystems that we so much depend upon. And there are some guiding principles for these ecosystem stewardship that are important to be considered. Mosaic spatial planning conserving and stabilizing carbon-rich habitats, considering adaptation limits also for ecosystems, not only for human society, and work on the principle of net gain with the biodiversity loss that we've already seen. All of the measures need to keep an eye on that there should be a net gain in biodiversity rather than just a limitation of future damage. With some of the mitigation measures, like reduction of meat and milk consumption, for example, we could reduce the amount of land that is just being used for producing animal feed and have some land gain that could help securing future food security and also biodiversity conservation. And all of this needs to integrate human interests for adaptation, livelihoods, and health. So there is a clear future ahead. It's complex. Silos need to be broken. There needs to be an interaction. But there is one key message, that any further delay in concerted global action will miss a brief and rapidly closing window to secure a livable future for all. And please, for all policymakers, to consult the IPCC reports for solutions and to implement them, because it is getting late. Thank you very much for your attention.
Actually, the next speaker unfortunately cannot come because it's Harald Winkler and he's in the GST negotiations, and there was just a new text coming out, so this is what can happen on a COP. The good thing is you had a few minutes more and you used them already, which is good. And we have time for 1 or 2 questions. Is there any question? No question? Oh, yes. We need the microphone, otherwise the stream cannot.
Daniel Scholz from Munich. I'm no scientist, but I'm quite keen on learning from science. So, how difficult is it actually to learn about the adaptability capacities of nature, actually, to adapt to what is just in terms of stress now? You said species are moving. What are the, let's say, the aspects you can learn from to assess where the limits are in regards to adaptability?
Yeah. First of all, certainly there are field observations which tell us how natural systems are responding to the stresses. So you need to monitor the stresses, like the physical stresses that the species are being exposed to. Then there are observations and documentation of the degree of movement of species, which tells you that their willingness, if you so wish, to adapt to the future climate in situ, where they have previously been living, is limited. They are following their temperature window that they are previously existed in. And then in order to understand what's going on, you would depend on laboratory work. You would do simulation experiments in the laboratory to expose these species long term under future conditions, and also you do mesocosm experiments where you expose full ecosystems and consider the environmental changes that they have been undergoing already and that they will be undergoing in the future based on the climate scenarios that is coming from the physical science community. And with that, then you need to monitor the genetic changes, if there are any, and the time frame of when these changes might occur. You can compare populations at different latitudes and look at their genetic differences and their physiological inventory, and thereby develop a complex picture. And as you can imagine, based on the complexity of how a living organism works, that this is time consuming, but we can certainly say, based on previous efforts, there's enough knowledge to guide our action with respect to conservation efforts and pushing for mitigation efforts as well.
With that, thanks again, Hans, for this nice overview of the AR6. Thank you very much. So, do I get some slides back again. Oh yeah, perfect. So it's really not. Ah yeah. I think. Well, maybe you can turn off the slides. So it's always an experiment here. So unfortunately, Harald Winkler cannot come because he was needed urgently. That means we will jump directly to the next speaker, which is already then the last speaker. And he will look into the future a little bit. Jim Ski, he was professor of sustainable energy at the Imperial College in London until he was elected as IPCC chair this summer in Nairobi. And before that, he was the co-chair of Working Group 3 for mitigation in AR6. In AR5, he was actually the vice chair of the same working group. And actually, he contributed since the early 90s, as I found out. So staying in this picture of shoulder of giants, when it comes to the IPCC at least, Jim has one of the broadest shoulders. So please, Jim, you have the floor. Tell us a little bit what you are up to in the IPCC in the next cycle.
Right. And just to say, I have clearly ceased to be a scientist because I'm wearing a tie, I've no PowerPoint, and I try to explain AR6 in 5 minutes generally. So that's usually my mission. Now, just to say on this topic of where we're going, we have heard loud and clear from policymakers the desire for IPCC reports to be more actionable, shorter, and clearer. And we are actually taking that message to heart, though it's perhaps not as simple to execute as some policymakers might imagine. So what I'm going to do, just a few remarks, where we are in terms of planning for the cycle, and then I want to say how we would approach different types of decision maker, because they come in all types of shapes and sizes. And finally, I'd like to look at just make some remarks about other considerations, which will take me neatly back actually to Hans's initial presentation. So in terms of where we are in planning, we did a lessons learned at the end of the 6th cycle, which essentially said we were probably too hyperactive in AR6. We did 3 special reports plus the usual outputs, and it meant we sacrificed a lot of other activity in terms of preparation and pump priming for new topics. And it was a very strong lesson learned that perhaps we shouldn't be as ambitious in AR7 in terms of the numbers of reports. So the decisions are going to be made at the first plenary of the next cycle in Istanbul in the middle of January. And we've seen this as a kind of a pipeline process for decision making. The working group co-chairs worked up an options paper, which we took to the Bureau meeting that took place last month. And after Bureau discussions, the executive committee essentially was mandated to produce a new paper which will help to structure decisions when we get to the plenary in Istanbul. Now, at the same time, governments were surveyed on possible topics that they would like to see covered, including in special reports. And without mentioning the number of votes for any one, some of the topics that came up were tipping points, the global goal on adaptation, including the idea of indicators for measuring progress, loss and damage, issues around overshoot, which actually comes out of the global stocktake that Harald might have talked about. And above all, I think the message that whatever we come up with should be relevant for the second global stocktake, which will start in late 2026 or 2027. Just to say, one thing we are committed to do is to produce a special report on climate change and cities, which we hope will be extremely actionable. And because Diana Urga-Vorsats, our vice chair, is chairing the scientific committee for that, I think that we can be optimistic about that. But I think a clear issue in respect to the governments is managing expectations about what we can actually achieve during the cycle. Now, talking about different kinds of decision makers, I'll just break it very simply into the international level and the national and the subnational level. The clear challenge we have at the international level, if we're going to be actionable and relevant, is to produce reports in time for the second global stocktake. And that is really something that is driving everyone and the considerations. And I think we should probably be able to get 2 reports out by then. One of them will be cities. So what would the other one be? And that's the question that we'd be addressing in Istanbul. Now, in terms of moving on to the national and subnational level, this is more process-oriented, but the various ways of making sure the reports could be more actionable. So engagement of decision makers in the scoping meetings where you get things set up. And there is a strong desire among certainly the Working Group 2 co-chairs who are managing the city's report that there should be a larger number of decision makers and practitioners actually present at the scoping meeting to set us in the right direction. And once we have a scope, it's also a question, can we have more decision makers in as authors of the report itself? So I think this thing is about engaging much more directly with decision makers is a key part of it. I think another theme that is there, I mean, it's often said that IPCC only reviews peer-reviewed or assesses peer-reviewed literature. That's not the case. We have rules in place for looking at grey literature and other forms of knowledge where it is relevant and peer-reviewed literature is not available to do it. And I think one of the things we could do much more in the next cycle is to draw on grey literature that touches on the agenda of what works, evaluating what kind of policies are successful and lessons can be learned. I may say we're also having a set of discussions about the way that Indigenous knowledge can be more incorporated in IPCC as it is actually in IPBES. And one other thing I would mention there is the question of how we engage with stakeholders during the production of reports. In Working Group 3 the last time, we had meetings during all of the review periods, not only with governments, but with businesses represented by the BINGO, Business and Industry NGO constituency, and the Environmental NGO constituency. That could be extended to other groups, including LGMA, the Local Government and Metropolitan Authorities Group, which would be very relevant for the city's report. And we've been holding discussions with what I've learned, LCIPP, far too many acronyms, the Local Communities and Indigenous Peoples Platform. We consulted with their FWG, the Facilitative Working Group, so we're really getting on top of the new sets of acronyms here. Now, just to say just a few other remarks about other ways of operating. I've said that we didn't do enough expert meetings in the last cycle because they were kind of crowded out by the number of reports. But I think there is very much an ambition to do more of that because it helps to open up new topics, it helps to pump prime the scientific community to generate new science that we can assess. And so we have a number of topics already that we will put to the governments, kind of with the implication if you ask us to do too many reports, we won't be able to hold these expert meetings. That's kind of the way we will approach it. And I'd finally like to end up actually where Hans started, on relationships with the other environmental crises, because we do need to think about how we interact with IPBES, the International Resources Panel, the UNCCD, the Convention to Combat Desertification. The mandate of its science policy interface is coming to an end shortly, and they would like to have a talk about how they proceed. And there will be a new chemicals and waste panel that we expect to see come as well. So IPBES is important, but it's not the only other UN assessment. So IPBES has David Abura, it's got a new chair. The International Resources Panel has Janusz Potecznik, and there are other people we're talking about. And we are actually in active conversation about how we can collaborate. I think our procedures prevent us from producing joint reports at the moment, but there are other softer means of collaboration that we can take forward. So I can see from my stopwatch I'm at 8 minutes and 8 seconds. I was given 7 minutes and I will stop here. So thanks for your attention.
Thank you very much, Jim.
Yeah.
I think we have time for one question. Yeah, that was the fastest, please.
Thank you very much. So my name is Karina von Schuckmann. I'm a Working Group 1 author from R6. And I have a question you mentioned, particularly with respect to the adaptation framework, the role of indicators, and the question on the methodologies on the indicator, with a specific example on one, but also holding for others, with a discussion on the overshoot when we reach 1.5 degrees, and with the current methodology, which is centered with a 20-year average, would mean that if it would take a lot of time to state that we have reached 1.5 degrees, and there was a discussion or a question whether IPCC would consider in R7 to have a specific discussion or agreement or discussion within the scientific community on these methodologies, not only for this one.
Yeah, just to say, I think this is as much a communication issue as anything else, is how we present the scientific knowledge to wider communities. And it has always troubled me with the 20-year average. If a policymaker comes to you and says, have we passed 1.5, we'll say, we'll tell you in 10 years' time when the 20-year average has come to an end. So we do need to think about the communication issues, because obviously if we do have exceedance and return below 1.5, honestly, the temperatures are going to be quite flat for quite a long time, and I think it will be very difficult, and you will see a lot of interannual variability. You'll see El Nino cycles, etc., disturbing it. So for me, it's a communication problem. I think the science can be made clear enough. I think it's how you communicate it.
So thank you very much. Thanks again, Jim. And yeah, round of applause. This finishes the first part of our Science for Action evening. This means actually that we also have to say goodbye to the stream, because we go now into round tables. And yeah, thank you very much for your attention, outside world. And you all stay here, of course.
Welcome to the German Climate Pavilion at COP28 in Dubai. Ambitious, just together.
All right, so you can turn on again the master slides, because now we are going to the round tables. And we have actually 3 topics and 2 experts per topic. We will have 6 we don't have tables, but we will 6 rounds of chairs, basically. And we will have